And I want to thank you all for joining us on this live tasting. And I want to introduce you all to Mario Spadoni, who is our private member coordinator.
How's it going, everybody? First off, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today for this member exclusive virtual tasting. We're so excited we get to host these with you guys, and we're going to share a little bit, about our wines and our story with you virtually. I do see some, familiar names and faces that I've been able to connect with before and have met before, and it's nice to connect with you again. But for those of you who I haven't connected with yet, I'm just going to start off by telling you a little bit about myself, and then we will jump into the tasting. So I've been with Medlock Games for about 2.5 years, working on the member services side and also in the tasting room. And I got into the wine industry probably about 6 years ago. Growing up in Sonoma County, I didn't really realize how beautiful it was and everything. And after I moved back from school, it really opened my eyes to the beauty that Sonoma County has to offer. And I got into the wine industry. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be tasting through 4 wines that were part of your spring release that really showcase Bell Mountain Ranch and Medlock Ames. We know you may not want to taste through all 4 of these wines with us, but we will have these videos up so you can see them later. And we will have them so they are each individual wine. So if you guys want to try the wines later, you can go back and revisit those videos. And then we're going to be keeping everybody on mute throughout the video. But we do ask that if you have any questions, go ahead and use the chat feature, and Ames will be answering them at the end. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ames, and he's going to kind of tell you the story about Medlock Ames and how we started.
So I know most of you are pretty familiar with Medlock Ames, but just as a refresher, Medlock Ames is an organic vineyard and winery. We're located in the Alexander Valley in the southernmost tip, sort of right where the Russian River Valley and the Alexander Valley meet. The ranch, which we call Bell Mountain Ranch, is 340 acres. We grow 9 different grape varieties. And we only plant about 55 of our acres. So most of our land, our intention is to keep it in its wild state. And we do that because we have taken some land out of habitat from nature, and we want to sort of preserve the rest. Of our 55 planted vineyard acres, over half are dedicated to Cabernet Sauvignon. And when we first developed our vineyard, we wanted to figure out what the ideal planting would be for each part of the vineyard. So we dug about 100 different backhoe pits all throughout the land and analyzed the soil at various depths in each one of those backhoe pits. And we also put data loggers all over the vineyard to measure the temperature highs and lows throughout the year. And that helped us hone in on what would be the ideal variety and the ideal rootstock for each type of soil and each sort of microclimate within the vineyard. So that's sort of how we figured out which of these 9 varieties we wanted to plant in which area. In addition to growing grapes, we also grow a few acres of olive trees. We make our own olive oil. We have a small fruit orchard. We have a gigantic organic vegetable garden, and we view ourselves as first and foremost farmers. And we, as such, we really, because we're in this vineyard every day, we really care about the land and its ability to endure. And so one of our founding principles was to farm organically. And I was inspired to do that because my father was a farmer, and he was sort of de facto organic. He probably would never have called himself that, but I learned from him sort of the value of thinking about land in the really long term and how it can sustain a family for generations. And then I also had the opportunity to live in Guatemala for a few years as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I worked with farmers there, and was just amazed that these people are descendants of people who invented agriculture 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, and they've been farming the same land. So it's really by definition sustainable. If the same plot of pretty shallow soil. It can sustain families for millennia. They're doing something to preserve that soil. So I learned a lot from them. But then really the biggest inspiration is because we're out working in the fields, and the people who work with us are there. And our children are there. We don't want them exposed to dangerous chemicals, and we don't want our customers to have wine that has had some exposure to synthetic chemicals. So that's sort of our philosophy. The first one I want to pour for you guys is our 2019 Sauvignon Blanc. This was just released a couple months ago. It went out in our spring release. And Sauvignon Blanc is one of my favorite grapes to grow, favorite wines to make. It's very quick from harvest to bottle, so it's kind of as far as wine goes, it's instant gratification. And the 2019 was a little bit wetter than 2018. We had a little bit more rainfall in the early part of the season, but in general, both of those years were pretty mild and warm. So really nice growing conditions. We harvested the 2019 a little bit later. And one thing I really love about the 19 is it has this pear and grapefruit and a little bit of star anise aroma. And then it has like a little bit of confectioner's sugar, kind of like this smell of powdered sugar. It makes it really interesting. And then it finishes with this sort of creamy texture in the end. And it differs a little bit from the 18. They're both, I would say, definitely similar, but the 18 was much more complex and more mineral driven, and the 19 is a little more pure fruit expression. And it's today is sort of one of the first really hot days of the year in Sonoma County. We're looking at some 100-degree weather, possibly later in the week or coming up next week. And so for me, Sauvignon Blanc is the perfect summer sipping wine. It's got enough acidity and freshness, and when it's chilled, it's very thirst quenching.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that, Ames. I'm gonna go ahead and try this one. Our Sauvignon Blanc, it's also often an intro wine when guests come to visit. If anybody's been to the ranch or the tasting room, we always mostly start with this wine. I always feel like it's a good wine to kind of introduce guests to Medlock Ames. Also, one thing that makes Bell Mountain Ranch so special is that we sit on both Alexander Valley and Russian River Valley. So that gives us the ability to grow this Sauvignon Blanc and our Chardonnay, while also growing, some of our Cabernet and some of our Merlot. This Sauvignon Blanc we actually grow on both Alexander Valley and Russian River Valley. So the cool mornings on Russian River Valley give this wine a great acidity. And then the hot days on the Alexander Valley side give this wine great sugar. So it gives it a great balance in the wine that gives the wine really rich flavors. So we're going to move on to our 2018 Lower Slope Chardonnay. It's actually the wine, it's kind of funny, it's the wine that actually got me into drinking white wines. I was never really the biggest fan of white wines until I tried this wine. And now it's kind of opened me to enjoying white wine while also, trying them whenever I can. So I'll pass it back to Ames to kind of introduce you to this wine.
Great. Well, so this is our 2018 Lower Slope Chardonnay. We make two Chardonnays. This is sort of our wine club exclusive. And over the years, we've sort of identified certain sort of subsection of our block of Chardonnay that makes sort of a different quality of Chardonnay. And we decided, a few years ago, we decided to start bottling that on its own. Because it was so good, and we wanted to highlight that difference. So when I drink this wine, it's I think I mentioned we have some fruit orchards on the vineyard or on Bell Mountain Ranch. And one of my favorite things to do is to harvest the fruit when it's really kind of warm from the sun. It really makes those flavors come out. And this wine really makes me think about harvesting super ripe, really sun warmed pears and slicing them up and pouring fresh cream over them. So it has that sort of the elements of both of those. And then it has this really nice hazelnut, toasted hazelnut character. And then on the finish, it has a little bit of apricot, sort of kind of this hint of apricot at the very end. And this wine we do a significant amount of it aged in stainless steel. And the idea of that is to maintain more of the freshness. Oak aging can, in addition to contributing an oak flavor, sort of the main purpose of aging and wine in oak barrels is to have this controlled, slow delivery mechanism of oxygen into the wine. With red wines, that's really important because that oxygen helps soften the tannins, but it also helps provide roundness and fullness to the Chardonnay. But with this wine, we really want to walk this tightrope between crispness and freshness that we get from the stainless steel aging, and sort of harvesting a little bit on early side, and balancing that with some sur lie aging. So sur lie aging is the lees that are the yeast cells. When they're finished with the fermentation, they settle to the bottom of the tank or the bottom of the barrel, and we stir them. And every time we do that about once a week or once every 2 weeks. Those cell walls start to break down and release amino acids from the yeast into the wine, and it gives it this really rich this sort of a fifth flavor category called umami. That's sort of that richness you get from protein, foods that are concentrated in protein like meat or other types of animal proteins that can give you that richness. And so with this lower slope, we're trying to walk that delicate balance between the richness on one side and the crispness and freshness on the other. And with this finish, the 2018, we bumped up the percentage of oak, and some people have asked why we did that, since we definitely want to keep a lot of that stainless steel influence in there. And the reason is because we a few years ago it has been mostly the Chardonnay has been made from the Seas clone, and a few years ago we planted some old Wente clone and we aged that in oak barrels. And when we tasted it, it was so good we wanted to include some of that into the lower slope. So we try to be flexible when we're doing our blending to pick elements that will make the wine as good as it can be and not be too dogmatic about whether how much stainless steel or oak we're using.
Awesome. So we're going to move on to the two reds that we're doing today. The first red we're going to do is the 2017 Cates and Bees Cabernet. As Ames mentioned earlier, we plant about 50% of our property is planted to Cabernet. So when he explains this wine, I'm going to have him kind of go over why we do that. And then he's also going to share why this wine is so special to him and Chris. So take it away, Ames.
So yeah, as I mentioned, over half of our vineyard acres are planted to Cabernet. Partly it's because Cab is king, and I think the Alexander Valley, where we grow our grapes, makes really wonderful Cabernet. But as I mentioned, when we figured out when we set up these data loggers all throughout the vineyard to figure out the temperature in various spots, there's certain it takes a certain amount of heat to ripen Cabernet, and so in our cooler spots we planted Chardonnay, and Sauvignon Blanc. In our warmer spots we planted Cab. We are in the southern part of the Alexander Valley. We're probably the coolest, or we're definitely the coolest part of the Alexander Valley. So it takes us a little bit longer to ripen our Cabernet. Most other Alexander Valley or even Sonoma County Cab vineyards are harvested by the time well before us. And what that does is it allows us to get a little bit more flavor, because the vines are slow to develop sugar, in the fruit, so we don't ramp up the alcohol too quickly, and we're able to leave the grapes hanging on the vine so they develop a little bit more flavor. And also that extra time on the vine allows the tannins that are in the skin to break down a little bit and soften. So one of our goals with Cabernet is to create really soft and supple wines. And at our elevation in the Alexander Valley, we tend to have Cabernet can be a little bit tannic. So we have to use some techniques like longer aging on the vine, or the way we ferment the grapes to make sure, and the way we blend to soften the what can be angular edges of the Cabernet. And so with the Cates and Bees, we always blend a little bit of Malbec and Merlot into it, and those varieties really help kind of fill out the middle and soften some of the edges of the cab. Mari was mentioning this is a really special wine. It's because the Cates and Bees are these two blocks that are the most beautiful blocks in our vineyard. They're on really steep slopes, and they're surrounded by oak trees, and they're named after our wives, Kate and Bee. And we were actually just in the vineyard yesterday evening, and we took a walk. In fact, went up to the highest part of the vineyard, and just sort of beyond the top of Bee's block. And it was as a part of the ranch I'd never been to before. And so I've been farming this land for 22 years, and it was such a revelation to be able to see this new vista that I'd never seen before. So even after all this time, it's really exciting to still have things feel fresh and new and exciting. And we also do every year in June we have our wine club dinner. We call it Dinner in the Vineyard. I'm sure some of you guys have been to it before. And this year, obviously, we can't have it, but we're going to do a virtual version of it. I think it's going to be next week or the week after, and we'll let you know about it. But we always have that dinner, or the past many years, we've had it in Bee's block, because it's this beautiful interface between the vineyard and the surrounding oak forest, and it's just a gorgeous spot. And right when the sun sets, it's one of the most beautiful areas I've ever seen. And there's also something about the Alexander Valley in general. I think it's just our latitude, our global latitude, is the light quality is like no place I've ever seen before. It just makes everything look so beautiful. The color saturation, there's something really unique about it. In addition to all those things I just mentioned about this wine, I'll tell you about the wine itself. It has this dark cherry, black currant, dark chocolate, sort of these first aromas you get when you smell it, and then it kind of picks up this violet and almost a perfumed aroma towards the end, and then it's got some very firm tannins, but very soft, and then it has this really long, soft finish.
Great. And then could you go into a little bit how maybe the 2017 fires affected this wine at all, or did it affect it, and any difference from the 16?
So 2017 was a much, much warmer vintage than 16. And one of the main impacts of heat, one of the main impacts is that the sugar ripens more quickly with more heat. So you have a risk of getting higher alcohol. But then it also kind of shifts the aromatic profile. So at 16, we get more red fruit, more cherry, raspberry, cranberry. And then with the 17, we get more dark fruit. And so that extra heat gives you just more ripeness, and those ripe fruit aromas. The 2017 fires, happened right when we were harvesting this block. And we were able to get everything harvested before the smoke settled and did any damage to the fruit.
Great. So we're going to be moving on to our secret ingredient, Malbec. It's a 2017 vintage. With a lot of our reds blending, kind of as you saw with the Cates and Bees, in style of our winemaking. And the Malbec is just another great example of that. I'm going to have Ames explain a little bit about the wine, and then we're also going to go into the name how we got the name Secret Ingredient, because that's always a popular question that we get. So he's going to open up the Malbec and tell you a little bit about it.
So yeah, people always ask about the name Secret Ingredient, and we planted this this block in 2008, and we had our or 2007, and we had our first harvest from it in 2010. And 2010 was one of the coldest years, or the coldest year in 100 years in Sonoma County, and it made it really hard to. And as I mentioned, we're already kind of in a cooler part of the valley, so it made ripening things hard. I think tomatoes didn't ripen until the middle of September. We were harvesting our Cabernet in November, and it was hard to get enough sugar and alcohol to properly, call it wine in that year. But the only thing that really ripened well was our Malbec, which was in its first year of production. And so we put a little bit of Malbec in all of our red wines, just a few percent, and it just made everything better. It just provided this beautiful, lush fruit flavor, and so we called it our secret ingredient. And so for several years we would use that to kind of dose up our other red wines, and then finally we had enough Malbec to actually bottle it separately. And so we just thought it would be fun to call it secret ingredient. But people are often confused by that. They always ask what the secret ingredient in it is, but it is itself the secret ingredient. So we have two different blocks of Malbec. So, and one of them is in this low-lying area that, despite our best efforts when we were digging backhoe pits to lay out the vineyard and find the ideal variety and for every spot, we planted our Cabernet in a spot that turned out to be a little bit too wet. And the problem with wet soil, or soil that holds onto its moisture longer for Cabernet, is that it delays its ripening, and it can give it kind of a green or vegetal aroma. And so this one low-lying block of Cabernet just never quite was good enough. So we grafted it, which means we cut off the top of it and took a little cutting from a Malbec vine and wrapped this special white tape around right where we connect the bud from the Malbec vine into the Cabernet vine, and then it turns it into a Cabernet. It turns it into a Malbec vine. So Malbec tends to ripen earlier. So it was really the ideal variety for that spot. And even though it's the same clone, it's the same variety, it's really different from the first Malbec we planted, and the two of them together make this really interesting blend. So the one thing I really like about this wine, it's got this really deep purple color. And when I think about Malbec, I always think about the color purple. It just, whatever purple tastes like, that's what I imagine in my mind. And it's really, one thing I find really distinctive about it is it has this white pepper, white flower aroma, and it's sort of like gardenias, and it's really aromatic, and it's just something about Malbec. It's just really different from all the other varieties we grow.
Thank you. So I do see some questions about the Moss Oak Pinot. So some members got the Moss Oak Pinot in the spring shipment, and some of the members got the Malbec in the February shipment. But can you go into the Moss Oak a little bit and just kind of explain that wine, just because some of our guests might be enjoying that wine today?
Sure. When we first figured out all the spots for our different varieties, we planted Pinot Noir in the absolute coldest part of the vineyard, because too much heat can kind of not be good for Pinot. It's one of the most delicate grapes. It's a red grape, and generally red grapes are hardier than white grapes, but they call it it's the white wine of red wines. Pinot is, and it's also known as the heartbreak grape, because it's just so fickle. It's really hard to get just right. We only have one clone of Pinot Noir, and we make it in sort of this classic kind of on the riper side of sort of the Russian River Valley, kind of classic California Pinot style.
Great. And then I know some of them actually got the 17 and 18. Is there a big difference between the two? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of the Pinots?
Yeah, the 2017 Pinot and the 2018.
Yeah, so 17 was just so much warmer. It's a much more on the riper side of the flavor spectrum than the 18.
Great. So I just want to thank all of our Bell Mountain Preservation Society members for joining us, and I hope everybody's staying safe and healthy during this time. We're going to be hosting these virtual tastings with a different theme each week. So you can look in your emails. We'll have it also on our website. And if you follow us on social media, we'll have the updates there as well. If there's any topics that you guys would like to hear about in the future tastings, let us know. We would, love to take recommendations. You can either email me at mario@medlockgames.com, or you can email the member services at medlockgames.com. We're now going to go through the chat and answer some of the questions that we got from you guys. So I'll go with the first one here. So one of the questions, I believe they're talking about the Sauvignon Blanc. Why does 2018 have more minerality and 2019 is more fruity?
I'm not sure. There's there's a lot of different theories about where minerality comes from. It used to be thought that it comes from the minerals of the soil, but that is no longer the dominant theory about minerality in white wines. I think it has a lot to do with the microorganisms that live in the soil, but I'm not 100% certain.
Okay.
And so more tillage, cultivating the soil, disking, as opposed to leaving a grass cover, would probably reduce the amount of minerality. And I can't remember if we did more cultivation in that block that year. Sorry.
Gotcha. Okay. We had another question here. Have the labels changed? So no, they haven't changed, but Ames, do you want to explain the difference between like our skinnier labels with the small lot wines and the bigger labels with the Bell Mountain wines?
Maybe. Yeah, so our original label we had on our Cabernet, our Bell Mountain Sauvignon Blanc, and our Russian River Valley Chardonnay, the label's a little bit bigger. And so, but then when we created the second line that we call the small lot label, they were generally smaller production volume, like the Malbec here. We created just a smaller label just to kind of distinguish between the two wines. It's the small lot ones were more scarce, and we just wanted to show a little bit something a little bit different.
Great. So we do have another question. How does the 2018 Chardonnay compare to previous years? I know you kind of described, the 17 to 18, but maybe, what about the 16 or the 15 compared to the 18?
The biggest difference would be relatively more stainless steel in the earlier vintages. But when we upped our level of the old Wente clone, that we brought a little bit more a little more oak into that wine, and then also the Seeds clone tends to have more of a lemony citrus character, and the old Wente clone has a more apple pear profile. And so as we've added more old Wente, we've got a little bit more of that pear aroma.
Okay. Let's see. We have another question about the Cates and Bees and how it differs from the 50 tons. So first, can you kind of explain the 50 tons and how we got that name, and then kind of do a comparison of the two?
Yeah. So the first year we found the vineyard, it was right before an El Nino winter, 1997, which is a very, very high rainfall year. And so a lot of the vineyards were on these steep terraces that were starting to collapse. So we were worried about having this rainfall erode and just destroy these terraces. So we moved in 50 tons of rock, and Chris and I hand placed all these rocks to rebuild these stone walls, and there were 50 tons of rock. So it's sort of a testament to the hard work we did to save this land. And so the Kates and Bees is meant to be a more it's named after women, so it's meant to be more feminine style. It's softer, it's more elegant, and the 50 tons is a cab is meant to be bigger, bolder, more of a masculine style.
Okay, we got another question here. So far, how has the 2020 season compared to previous ones? And any thoughts on how that will impact the ultimate flavors from this year?
I'd say it's still pretty early. We've had some erratic weather, some late rains. We had some really heavy rainfall just a few days ago, and now it's really hot. Later rain means more growth and possibly larger berries. So one just kind of theorizing a little bit, bigger berries have less tannin, so we might have to do a little bit of saignée, a little bit of bleeding some of the tank to get more concentration before we start the fermentation. But it's still really early to make any prediction at this stage.
We're crossing our fingers.
Yeah.
So next question, do you use different cork types for different wines? And if yes, why? And then can the corks be recycled or composted?
The corks can definitely be composted. I don't know about recycled. I think, yeah, there are some people that recycle them, not in your normal stream, but I think there are people that use them to make flooring. They grind them up and make flooring. But I'm not sure how that happens. We don't do that. We do use two different kinds of cork. One is just a regular natural cork, and they're both natural. But one is what we call a composite. It's made from ground up pieces of cork that are compressed together, and we do that in our Sauvignon Blanc and our Estate Cab and Russian River and Estate Red. And we do that because there's a certain amount of maybe 2% of all corks have this problem with them called cork taint or trichloroanisole that can give the wine this wet cardboard aroma, and that's pretty high. It's a pretty high percentage of just like going into it knowing you're going to have this product damage. And so we've been experimenting with these other corks which are guaranteed not to have that problem, just to see if we can eliminate that that problem in all of our wines. But we're still evaluating.
Well, and I actually have a question about the corks as well. I get this a lot. Is there a cork shortage? And have we ever thought about using screw tops at all? I get that a lot when I do my tours and host people in the tasting room.
Whenever I taste a corked wine, I think about like if we should use capsules, aluminum capsules, but corks are. I have not heard of a cork shortage. Corks are natural. You don't have to kill the oak tree to harvest the oak. To harvest the cork, they peel off part of the bark and it regrows, over the next few decades. And so it's a sustainable resource. There are endangered species that live in these cork oak forests in Spain and Portugal. And so by keeping those, having a commercial use for those trees keeps habitat alive for those animals. Whereas aluminum is this very water and resource intensive extractive process. So just in theory, I like the idea of this natural cork over aluminum. And then also sometimes you can get with aluminum capsules, you can get reduction in the wine, which can many wineries use them, so they figure out how to avoid that problem. But you can get this something called reduction wine, which can give the wine a little bit of a stink that we definitely don't want.
Yeah, definitely. So we got another question here. Do you model your winemaking on a specific region or style?
That's a good question. Definitely take inspiration from like for our Chardonnay. I visited Burgundy 15 years ago and was just so moved um, by the people who you meet, who give you the tour of the winery, are also the owners. They're also the farmers. They do everything, and they make the wine. It's just so I really like their style. Bordeaux is different. It's much fancier, more elegant, and less my style. But I love their wines. But so yeah, I'm not sure. But I definitely take inspiration from wines from all over the world.
Okay. And then we have another question. This is actually going back to the lower slope. Is the lower slope a malolactic chard, or is it the lees that give it the richness? So can you go over that again?
Yeah, it goes through malolactic fermentation. So that so wine when we first harvest the grapes have a few different kinds of acid that are naturally present in the wine or in the juice, and one of them is called malic acid. It's that same sort of tartness you get when you bite into an apple, and it goes through this secondary fermentation that's separate from the alcoholic fermentation, and this malic acid gets converted to lactic acid, which is less acidic. It's softer. So that's one way to soften the wine. So we do that, and we do lees stirring. So those are two different approaches we get to making the soft, rich wine.
Okay, so they're kind of both adding to that richness.
Yeah.
We have another question here. So Medlock Games is clearly number one, they said. But are there any other wineries in the area that you enjoy or you like to visit?
Oh yeah. One of our neighbors in the gym right near our tasting room is Hawks Winery. I really like their wines. We have a neighbor. They don't have their own tasting room, but it's called Sutro, and they make really wonderful wines too. Sonoma County we're so fortunate to have just an amazing growing region with like tons of experimental growers that are trying all different kinds of things. I really love the Sonoma County wines.
Great. And then we have another one. How is or will the current COVID crisis affect any winemaking or any of the process that you guys need to go through?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's winemaking is essentially it's half of it is farming, and so all of our farming operation happens outside. Our vineyard team just naturally they're separated by rows of vines, so they never need to worry about that, except at mealtime they always love to eat together, and it's this conviviality that makes that really hard work in the vineyard more palatable as you get to come together with your friends and enjoy a meal. And so we haven't been able to do that, so that's kind of hard. But just the nature of farming is that it's pretty easy to keep separate other than that. And same in the winery, which is the other half of the winemaking process. We have a really small cellar team, and other than meal times, they're always able to keep separated. I guess the only slight risk is at bottling time. Everyone's working together on the bottling line. So we just bottled this past week, and so we had to be able to work hard to keep everybody spaced properly with masks. But in general, I'd say it hasn't been an issue. But the hardest thing is we're not able to open our doors for our customers, for people to visit the tasting room, other than just picking up.
Great. So we have a couple questions. So how about international wines? Are there any international wines that you really enjoy or have visited before?
Yeah, I went on a whirlwind wine region tour in 2004. I went to Burgundy, Bordeaux, the Rhone Valley, Piemonte, and New Zealand. And I just was amazed. They're all very, very different regions, but I just loved the wines from all those areas. Being anywhere, like, really is just such a richer experience than just tasting the wine from afar. So I'm very, very easily influenced by places I visit, and getting to taste wine in a castle in Piemonte. It's just an amazing experience.
Great. And then says here, you also mentioned experimental wines. What kind of experiments? And then also says these wines aren't natural. Ever thought about a one-off natural wine?
Definitely. Yeah. So some of our experiments have involved natural winemaking methods. We've done some experimenting with orange wine, where you ferment and treat a white wine like a red wine. So you crush the grapes and let the white juice ferment in contact with the skins. So one of the problems of doing all these experiments is we now have 17 different SKUs, 17 different wines. And for a winery of our size, that's just a lot. It's hard for you, Mario, to have to coordinate how to sell all those wines and package them up. But it can be a little bit confusing, I think. So, but whenever we come up with, we try some new experimental wine, it tastes good, we want to share it. So, but we might try to winnow that down a little bit, because 17's a lot.
Great.
Oh, and then natural. Yeah, I mean, I love we do use a lot of natural methods, and all of our farming is natural and organic. But we do use SO2 to keep the wine from spoiling. And there are some new methods coming out that are being perfected to not have to use SO2. And I would like to learn more about that for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for your questions. We had some great ones. I'm going to pass it off to Ames to kind of, conclude anything that you want to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. It's really, normally when I'm in the vineyard or in the cellar, and I don't interact with our customers very much, and our club members. So we've been doing these online tastings every week for the past few weeks, and I think we're gonna do them throughout the summer. And it's just been really gratifying for me. It's fun to see everybody's face. While we're all separated, I strangely feel more connected to people than I did when we were allowed to see people. So I just really want to thank all of you for sharing your time with us, and continuing to drink and enjoy our wines. And we hope to keep making good wine for you. So cheers, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Hope you guys are enjoying the wine.
Don't get to listen often, so it's quite fun.
Bending like